state of America and state the cause to be failing to sustain a lawful dollar while allowing a central bank takeover for the third time, also that taxes is theft upon the American people, allowing politicians to commit crimes and profit, and much much more. Can you add some more?
Certainly, here's a fictional and modernized version of the Declaration of Independence for the scenario you described, with additional grievances. The Declaration of Independence from the United States of America. When, in the course of human events, it becomes evident that the government of a nation is no longer capable of sustaining a lawful currency and allows a central bank to wield undue influence for the third time, it is the duty of the people to articulate the causes that compel them to seek independence and create a government that truly upholds their interests and rights. We, the people of America, declare that the principles upon which our nation was founded, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, have been eroded by a government that has lost its way. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that governments are instituted to secure these rights and derive their just powers from the consent of the governed.
We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable, that all men are created equal, etc.
Yet, in our modern age, 1. The government has repeatedly failed to maintain the stability of our currency, allowing it to be manipulated by a central bank, undermining the economic well-being of our citizens. 2. Taxes have become an oppressive burden, sapping the livelihoods of hard-working Americans, as the government continues to overspend and overreach without accountability. 3. Politicians have been granted immunity from prosecution for their actions, allowing corruption to fester and ensuring that some are above the law.
They said, "You have no authority, you're not the president." The president said, I said, "Call him." I said, "I'm telling you, you're not getting $1 billion. I said, "You're not getting $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here." And I think it was, 6 hours? I looked, I said, "I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money." Well, son of a bitch. Got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
4. The erosion of civil liberties has reached alarming levels, with unwarranted surveillance, restrictions on free speech, and the militarization of law enforcement.
I just gotta say,
5. Our government has neglected its duty to address pressing issues such as climate change, income inequality, and systemic discrimination, prioritizing partisan politics over the common good. 6. Endless conflicts and interventions abroad have led to the loss of American lives and squandering of national resources.
Since the war began, the U.S. has committed more than $113 billion in assistance to Ukraine.
This hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
And it is true that much of the intelligence turned out to be wrong. As president, I'm responsible for the decision to go into Iraq.
7. Corporate interests wield undue influence over our political system, at the expense of the voices of the people.
Part of the other fear, which is that our institutions are no longer trustworthy, that they have become not truth-seeking exercises, but rather auction houses in which people who are powerful and wealthy can buy a version of the truth that suits their parochial ends.
8. Inadequate healthcare, education, and social services continue to plague our nation, despite the promise of a better future. In the face of these grievances and more, we, the people of America, do hereby declare our independence from the United States of America. We do so not out of a desire for chaos but with the intention of forming a new government that will uphold the principles of justice, equality, and liberty for all.
One people we stand all together, one voice saying yes we can. Cause the people with power for the power of the people when we stand as one.
We pledge to establish a government that is accountable to the people, that secures our economic well-being, and that safeguards our individual freedoms. We seek to create a society where the rights of every citizen are protected, and where government is a true servant of the people. We call upon the international community to recognize our right to self-determination and pledge to uphold the values of freedom, democracy, and human rights as we embark on this journey toward a new future. With this declaration, we affirm our commitment to the principles of our founding and our determination to create a government that truly represents the interests and aspirations of the American people. Signed by the independent people of America. Your name, city, state, date. Again, please note that this is a fictional exercise and not an actual declaration. It is intended to be a creative reinterpretation of the historical document for a hypothetical scenario.
Sure you wrote it big enough?
Yes, old King George should be able to see that.
The representatives of the United States of America do, and with the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. In the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortune, and our sacred honor.
In effect, is putting the judge in the same position as Pontius Pilate. You know, I don't want to kill the guy because he's not guilty, but on the other hand, if I don't give him to the people, it won't look good to Caesar and I won't get a promotion next year. I may not get a merit raise. You know, Pilate was a good bureaucrat, and so some of our judges are good bureaucrats, but some of our judges also know and understand constitutional law. And if enough of us, and I'm not saying thousands of us, I said enough, 10, 15 people. You know, it only requires about 10 or 15 people, to my estimation, maybe 30 at the most. Good, competent pro se's operating in any county, going into those courts regularly. I mean, once a year out of the 15 or 30 that you've got. And there's 15 to 30 lawsuits a year, 15 to 30 constitutional questions a year. Pretty soon, the lower courts will have to start making those decisions pursuant to the Marbury Doctrine, because if they don't, it floods the higher courts, and pretty soon the state Supreme Court says, "What's the matter with you dummies over there? Can't you make decisions?" Now, that hasn't been done in America for 75 years. Citizens have not been taking their issues to court, and it's time that they started doing that again. And that's why here in Ada County, I just got word in the newspaper the other day that they're going to have to hire some new judges here to hear all these appeals that are coming around. Gosh, I wonder where all these appeals are coming from. I'll tell you where all the appeals are coming from. They're coming from citizens, people just like me and people just like you. And you know, every appeal that goes in there, they're sitting there, "Oh, we'll just dispense of this housewife from Cuna. Why, she's dumb. She can't chew gum." And pretty soon you get this housewife from Cuna walking in there with good paper. We've got a housewife that can chew gum and talk at the same time, Judge. And I want my issues listened to. And all of a sudden, oops, gosh, now I've got to listen to this woman. And whether he's an unjust judge or not, he's sitting there saying, I've got to listen to this case. And the reason that the lower courts will be compelled to listen and make these decisions at the lower level on constitutional grounds is because the higher courts, remember, have less and less available resources to do it. Now watch this scenario. In Ada County, there are about 3 magistrate traffic court judges and I think 7 magistrates, which makes a total of 10 magistrates courts that could have ruled on, let's say, this motion for a writ of habeas corpus. Let's take another one. A motion to produce a transcript of the hearing under Rule 5.2. 10 of those judges in 10 separate courts are making those types of decisions, and it could easily be decided right there. They will typically, because of the costs involved, say, no, we're not going to do that. If you want it, pay for it. All right. So the case is completed and we take it to the district court. Now in the district court, I think there are 6 district court judges, maybe as little as 5, about half as many. All right? So there's half as many courts then to listen to this issue of motion to produce transcript of the hearing. All right? Let's suppose that that district court judge says, yeah, I agree, I'm not going to listen to it either, Gordon. Now I take the issue up to the appeals court. There's only one of those in Idaho, a 3-panel judge which was designed to take the load off of our state Supreme Court. Let's say that they look at it. Well, there's only one of those courts, and if they don't listen to me there, I'll take it to my state Supreme Court. So do you notice what happens? You have 1,000 people going into the magistrates' courts. Okay, out of those 1,000, they weed out all the cases but 50, and those 50 cases are appealed to the district court. The district court weeds out 40 of those, and only 10 cases are left to go to the appeals court. The appeals court can get rid of 8 of those, and only 2 merit going to the state Supreme Court. Of those 2, only 1 of those would warrant then going on to San Francisco, to the circuit court, or to the Supreme Court of the United States. Watch what happens when you get 30 pro se's operating, or 15 in the county. Whatever the normal load is, it suddenly skyrockets because all 15 of those pro se's qualify their case to be heard by the district court because they're competent and knowledgeable. The district court turns down all 15 of them. All of a sudden, all 15 of those now qualify. Maybe one of our boys fouls up and only 14 qualify, but they qualify then to go on to the appeals court. Uh-oh, our boys are pretty sharp. The appeals court can't just summarily dismiss those. Our boys qualify those 14 for our state Supreme Court. So whatever the level is, at our state Supreme Court level, our boys now, because they've been up here to lesson 29, and now in lesson 30, they say, oh, here's Rule 54. All an appeal is a simple motion and brief. You know, when you get to the appeals process, friend, you've got all the work done. Here it is. All the work is done. All you got to do now is write one more brief and motion. That's all the paperwork I need to get to the district court. The district court turns me down. That's all the paper I need to get into the appellate court. And friend, that's all the paper I need now to get to the state Supreme Court. 3 more motions. What the hell's 3 more motions? The critical thing to remember now in these appeals, though, is this thing of the rules, because, boy, they're going to come down. They want to get rid of you. But our boys are pretty sharp. Now, what would happen in Idaho if we had 15 citizens, that's one school, in each of the counties of Idaho? There's 44 counties, so let's multiply that out. We got 44 counties, and let's say we get, say 20. That's somewhere between 15 and 30. 440 pro se's twice, isn't that right? Yeah, that's 880. In the state of Idaho, if I could establish a school in each county of Idaho in the next year or 2, I would have 880 citizens out there who are competent. Of the 880 citizens who are competent, the statistics in Idaho show that every other person in Ada County, that's man, woman, and child, gets a traffic ticket. But 50% of us are not drivers. You know, I'm a man, I've got a wife. Statistically, 1 out of every 2 people, well, my gosh, I've got 5 children, there's 7 in my family. That means that my wife and I are entitled statistically to get 3.5 tickets, aren't we? You see the way our police powers are oppressing us? Now what happens if, let's just say, each of the 880 citizens gets 1 ticket? Statistically, they're going to get 2 or 3 if they're drivers. But let's just say they get 1. There's 880. Let's say 80 of them, because of one reason or another, won't qualify. We could have 800 appeals in front of our state Supreme Court. Let me tell you, friends, that long before there's 800 appeals sitting over there on McFadden's desk, that he's going to be on the telephone talking to the district court judges and the magistrate judges saying, fellas, it's time that you guys made some decisions down there in the courts and in the courtrooms. I don't want to be making decisions on Rule 5.2. I don't want to be making rinky-dink and Mickey Mouse decisions on counsel. It's time you guys grew up. Now, that hasn't happened here, and of course lawyers don't bring up these kinds of issues. And it's time that citizens brought up their rights issues and brought them over here to the courts. The courts won't be swamped. This isn't a confrontation to drive the courts into oblivion or to overthrow the government. It's an assertion of the citizens' rights to be free from the police powers and its oppressive use by policemen who are using it improperly. It's an assertion of the right of the citizen to tell the tax collector, you collect it from the right guy, dummy, but don't come over here and try to collect tax from me because I don't owe it. And pretty soon the courts are going to have to send that message down the line and tell those tax collectors, troops, you're going to have to stop doing this. Now, if they won't stop doing that, here's where the ace of trump comes into play, and that's called the civil rights suit, the civil rights action. 880 citizens in the state of Idaho, out of a population of getting close to 1 million now. This state can't function with 800 appeals in a state Supreme Court. The thing that saves them now is that most people from the scene of the crime on will foul up in some way, and that case can be dismissed and it will not go to the state Supreme Court. It'll be fouled up. A person will give up because of the cost. He has to hire a lawyer to do it, and so it won't go on. That's the thing that saves him. But you can't deny a man his rights without suspending our Constitution, and we're not quite ready to do that yet, in my opinion. You give me 800 citizens in the state of Idaho, and we'll turn the state right side up, and we'll do it in 6 months or less. I don't need to write letters to to the editor of the Statesman. I don't need any letters to Steve Sims and the rest of the congressional delegation. If you people want gold and silver in the state of Idaho, let me tell you, friends, I just need 15 of you people, maybe 20 if I can get you, let's say 20 in every county in this state. And let me tell you, we'll have gold and silver in Idaho if the other 49 states have it or not. And that's fact. Redress of grievance comes on the courtroom floor. But it does require a certain amount of diligence and a certain amount of assertion and a certain amount of effort. I mean, it's a hell of a lot easier to sit here and write a letter to Steve Sims and say, well, I've done my part. I told Steve Sims to give us back our gold and silver, and if he doesn't do it, I'll vote for somebody else next time. And that's the extent of the involvement of the citizenry of America between 1900 and 1983. I hear a lot of rhetoric. I hear a lot of people writing letters like the John Birch Society, and God bless the John Birch Society. I'm not running anybody down. But they're out here busily writing letters, and they can sit here and write letters until the millennium is half over, and you're not going to get gold and silver. You people can write 50 letters a day until hell freezes over, and you won't get gold and silver in Idaho. But you give me 800 citizens that are competent pro se litigants that'll walk in on the courtroom floor and say, troops, it's time we had gold and silver, and by God, we'll get gold and silver. Because if we don't get gold and silver, let me tell you, friends, the state of Idaho simply will stop functioning. It just can't function. You give me 800 people, my goodness, we've only got 800 prisoners out here in our state penitentiary. What are they going to do with the 800 alligators in our state? Are they going to put all 800 of us out here in the penitentiary? Pray tell, what are you going to do with the mass murderers out here? What are you going to do with the burglars and the rapists and the robbers and the pillagers and the criminals? And the criminals. You're beginning to see how much power a citizen wields on the courtroom floor. You know, one citizen with his appeal process overrode the governor of the state and the entirety of the legislature. I don't even know the guy's name. Remember? The guy up in Boundary County that said, wait a minute, you people are violating our state constitution and you're splitting our counties for political purposes, and he brought suit. Cost him $41. He walked in there and paid 41 phony Federal Reserve notes. He never even tendered lawful money, I'll bet you. and brought that case to the state Supreme Court. And right now, my words are coming out of my mouth and onto this tape here in July of 1983, our legislature is going to have to change. They've been following a lawless procedure for 16 years, and one citizen by himself stopped them dead in their tracks. Can you begin to imagine what 800 people would do? I'm not talking about some mass movement out here. I'm telling all of you that are weak and faint-hearted and can't do this, get the hell out of my way. I don't even want you in the fight. All I need is about 20 people up there in Boise County, Idaho. Just, 4 or 5 housewives up in Idaho City and 5 or 6 mill workers over in Horseshoe Bend and a couple, 3 farmers up in Crouch, and watch what happens in your county seat when you people walk in on that courtroom floor with a traffic ticket and say, "Hold it right here, troops. I'm not going to plead to this charge. I'm not going to submit to tyranny. I demand all of my rights at law. I've set my case at the scene of the crime. And if you violate my rights, I'm going to bring a Title 42 action." Now, out of these 800, let's just say that 100 of these citizens are judgment-proof. That's 1/8. I would contend that the way our government in Idaho operates, that with 800 citizens, you can come up with 800 civil rights violations a year. But let's assume that we've only got 100. Do you think for a moment that the state of Idaho can withstand an onslaught of 100 $1 million lawsuits per year for as long as it takes? Just how long do you think it'll take our state legislature and our county prosecutors to wake up to the realization that $100 million a year out of 100, my God, we ought to win 4 or 5 a year by accident, for crying out loud. And if they had to spend $20,000 a copy on each one of these 100, how much is that? $2 million a year to argue these cases to Washington? And by golly, our issues are rights issues. Out of 100 of them, by statistics alone, we ought to get 100 of them qualified for the Supreme Court in Washington. What do you think the Supreme Court in Washington is going to do with 50 cases that come, say 100 cases that come to them a year? And it could be as many as 800. And the Supreme Court of the United States starts seeing all of this garbage coming out of out of Idaho to Washington. Don't you think they're going to take a few of those cases, if for no other reason, like the unjust judge, just simply say, look, we've had these guys out in Idaho are just driving us up the wall. We'd better take this driver's license case out of Idaho and at least tell them, no, go jump in the lake. At least we better tell them no, because they keep coming back and back and back, and they just won't give up. You see, the sheer weight and the sheer cost. And then on the lawsuits, you've got this other double whammy that comes along from Little Abner, and that is the insurance underwriters just simply are not going to sit still for lawsuits totaling $100 million a year. The insurance rates and the insurance premiums on these county governments and these city governments in Idaho are going to come unglued. The boardrooms of Mutual of Omaha and Prudential and good old Sears in the Sears Tower are going to reverberate from coast to coast and border to border. There is just no way in the world that those insurance underwriters could withstand an onslaught of $100 million in lawsuits from citizens. It just isn't going to happen. And somewhere between here with 1 and there with 800, they're going to have to capitulate. They're going to have to sit down with you, my friend, up there in Grangeville, Idaho, or Tensed, Idaho, or some little burg out there in Oregon, wherever it is you live, and they're going to have to sit down in a local restaurant over coffee and sue for peace. And the bottom line of it is, when you get out here on the appeal picture, which is when you get out to here, here's where the fun starts. Between lesson 1 and 29, friend, it was all work. When I get out here to lesson 30 and I start on the appeals, I finally get and I say, now I've arrived. Now for a change, it's time for me to bloody your nose and to black your eyes. Time for me to bloody your nose and to black your eyes. It's time now for you to spend a little more. $7,000 for a 65 Chevy just ain't enough. I want you to go over to Jesse Walters here, and I want you to explain your theft to him. And if Jesse doesn't want to hear it, then I want you to take it to McFadden. And if McFadden doesn't want to hear it, let's go to San Francisco. And let's you people bill that insurance company your $100 an hour for every hour that it's going to take you to answer all the briefs and motions that we're going to be filing now with these district courts, appeals courts, state supreme courts, the Circuit Court of Appeals, and the Supreme Court of the United States. Now let me, in the closing minutes, give you my final sales pitch. We've completed 30 lessons. And I don't contend that in 30 lessons that you're going to be competent with F. Lee Bailey. But I'll tell you this, I've told you the essentials of what I know. And I told you in lesson 1 that when you got to lesson 30, you'd say, well, is that all there is to it? That's right, it's about all there is to it. It doesn't require millions of people, but the few people that it does require have to be the kind of hard-nosed, dedicated people that can go to jail and stay there for whatever it takes. I've got to have John Lilborns. I've got to have Rick Mitchells. I've got to have Claude Potts. We've got to have the kind of people that have the resolve and the dedication that when the issue comes up, by God, we're going to get an answer to that issue if it takes from now until the millennium to get it. I don't know if it's going to come this year or next year or 5 years from now, but if it takes somewhere between now and 5 years from now, we're going to get gold and silver in Idaho. Now, you can just make up your minds to that, and you can do it sooner or later. You can spend a lot of money in the process. I've showed you here in this lesson. These boys could have came to me, and they even probably for less than $3,000. You know, if the guy would have driven my car home, washed it, pumped up the tires, and filled the gas tank, I probably would have taken my car back. At this moment in time, the dummies have spent $7,000, and I think before it's all through, they're going to spend somewhere in the neighborhood of about $25,000. And friend, I'm telling you, that's the most expensive 1965 Chevrolet that the insurance underwriters have ever bought in Ada County. And let me tell you, friends, I'm not going to tell you how many, but there's a lot more of them. And you know, they stopped stealing our cars here in Ada County. Although they did steal a pickup the other day, the Highway Patrol hasn't learned what Boise City's learned, so I think we'll just teach the state of Idaho the same lesson we taught Boise City. That's going to be the most expensive 1963 Ford pickup you ever stole, Idaho. And Attorney General Jim Jones, they're going to sit down with one of us one of these days over at Elmer's Coffee Shop, and we're going to talk about it. And you're either going to talk to us over there, and you can lock George Gordon up in that penitentiary for the rest of his life. And if you don't want to talk to me, by God, you're going to talk to somebody else. Because before we're through, there'll be 800 of us. And there just simply isn't enough money, Mr. Jones, for you to continually oppress us and impose this tyranny upon us. You just don't have enough money. And I don't need any political movement. I just need 300 good left-handed men. And I've already got that many. And I'm going to get a whole lot more. And for those of you that are out there in Illinois, I know some of you have told me that Illinois is a police state that makes Idaho look like utopia. You will not receive, you will not get the benefits of this pro se procedure in your courts for about a year. They're going to lock you up in jail. They're going to beat you and scourge you. They're going to ridicule you and make fun of you. And it requires diligence and hard work. It requires sacrifice. For those of us that are going to do it from day to day, week to week, month to month, it's going to require evidence, facts, figures, times, dates, places, so that you can nail it down for that Title 42 suit. When that policeman stops you on the road, mister, what's your name? Why are you doing this? What's your probable cause? Right down the line, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And he'll get angry with you and he'll lock you up in jail. And when you're in jail, Mr. Jailer, what's your name? What's your address?
If you just bought a home with a 4% interest rate,
what's your address? What's your rank? And why are you doing this? And pretty soon, you'll begin to get to a place where when you walk into that courtroom, they'll be saying, oh, it's Mr. Gordon again. They'll hate your guts, but they'll sure respect you for what you're doing. And they'll all sit back because, you know, these people are timid. They flee when none pursue. The cowardice that is being displayed in our county by our police is embarrassing, to say the least. I'm absolutely embarrassed. I don't think we could fight a war with El Salvador and win if they had 300 righteous men down there. It requires 100 of these guys around here to arrest one criminal, at least up in North Dakota it does. It takes 5 Boise policemen to arrest a housewife from Cuna, for crying out loud. And I contend that if we're dealing with cowards like that, there isn't even a contest. And that's why I'm kind of into the fight. But I'm not saying for a moment that a handful of those cowards are not going to haul some of you off and throw you into prisons and dungeons. After all, they did that to Paul and Peter and Titus and killed Christ. And you know, and we've got some modern-day contemporaries, you know. What do? Don't they lock up people like Alexander Solzhenitsyn? You know, if the guy writes a book and speaks out and tells people the truth about what he sees, it's a threat to the tyrants that are in control and power, and they sit there and they always overreact with more repression and more tyranny. It's been that way from time immemorial. These fellas, as an example, as we close here, you know, instead of coming down with repression and tyranny, all they had to do is apologize and give me back my car. Wouldn't that have made a whole lot more sense than spending $7,000 for a 1965 Chevrolet? And they haven't even got started yet. But they will come down with more and more repression. And you can always predict their behavior because of their historical past. But there comes a point in time when somebody puts the brakes on them. And they put the brakes on them when their superiors say, wait a minute, if you dummies over there in that court can't handle these issues, then we're not going to nominate and suggest you for promotion to the next level up. And so that kind of peer pressure comes down on them in the same way it comes down on us. Now, at this moment in time, as we complete this lesson, we have 19 schools nationwide. There's 5,036 counties in this country. We need 5,036 schools. And with 5,036 schools with 20 citizens in each county, we can turn the United States around. And you know, when there was a fellow named Melchizedek came to Abraham one day, he said, I'm walking down the road. And Abraham was concerned, said, where are you going? Oh, I'm going over to Sodom and Gomorrah. Oh, what are you going to do over there? Oh, I'm going to bring fire and brimstone down, kill everybody. Gosh, that's pretty serious, isn't it, God? What if there were 100 righteous people over there? Well, if there was 100 righteous people over there, I'd spare the place for the sake of 100 righteous. Oh. Well, gosh, what if they were short 10? What if there's only 90 righteous? Well, probably for 90 righteous, yeah, I'd probably save it for that. I probably wouldn't destroy it. Abraham worked him on down till he got to 10. And this fellow Melchizedek, who was Jesus Christ, I think, at the time. Anyway, he was an angel or God, and it depends on your your religious viewpoint here. Anyway, one thing you got to admit, he was a pretty powerful fellow. He said, I'm going over here and wipe out 2 towns, and so no matter who he was, he had a lot of power. Got down to 10 guys, and he said, yeah, you show me 10 righteous men over there, and I'll probably save that place for the sake of the 10 righteous that you show me in Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, there's 230 million Americans in this country. You know, 230 million of us. And I'm sitting here saying, well, I think I need about 800 here in Idaho. 800. Let's suppose there's 900. There's 900,000 people. There's 1% of the people in this state of the caliber of people that we need to turn things around. I don't know. I don't know of 800. Let's go find out if we've got that many. That's what I'm suggesting for those of us here in the state. We need 20 people in every county that's got a county seat in the courthouse. 20 citizens that'll walk into the courtroom day after day, week after week, month after month, assert their rights and let the judges know that there are differences between corporations and individuals, and there's a few individuals left out here. That no matter how rotten the rest of the country is, there's a few of us over here that have some standards and values and demands, and that we want our rights. Maybe it's only 5% of us, I don't know. It's my understanding that during the Revolutionary War, only about 5% of the people were really active in supporting that revolution. Let's see if we've got 5% of the people here, maybe even less. Now, you do that in Illinois, you do that in Michigan, you do that in New Hampshire and Connecticut and Texas. You do that in Illinois, you do that in Michigan, you do that in New Hampshire and Connecticut and Texas and wherever you are. 20 people in some of those obscure counties will do more than turn that place right side up. In fact, there are some counties that are so sparsely populated they couldn't afford a lawsuit of $1 million. Their entire budget in Boise County, Idaho is only $500,000. Some of you people, you know, out there in Chicago, you talk about $500,000. The budget in Chicago, I think, is in the billions of dollars. We have a county with a courthouse in Idaho with a total budget of $500,000, and they're bankrupt. They can't even raise $500,000 to keep the roads graded. What's going to happen when just one citizen walks over there and sues the sheriff or some deputy for $1 million for a civil rights violation? Just one! What are they going to do? Can you imagine the kind of impact that 15 citizens in that county would have? Well, you'd have a hard time getting people to run for the city councils and for the commissioners' jobs over there. It doesn't require thousands upon thousands and millions upon millions and mass movements and demonstrations. As I said in Lesson 29, you give me 3,000 people around Lawrence Radiation Lab that were competent pro se's. I don't know if this is good or bad. I think we could shut Lawrence Radiation Lab down with 3,000. We'd bankrupt those guys. And I don't need 3,000. I just need a few hundred. Just a few hundred good men to chase these Amalekites right out of our land and to straighten the government back to where it was, let's say about 1900. It might have had some problems in 1900. We might have had some rights problems and constitutional violations. But one thing I'll guarantee you, we didn't have anywhere near the kind of repression and regulation that we've got today. And that the root cause of it starts with the failure of the substance of our common law with HJR 192 in 1933, when we in effect declared bankruptcy and repudiated our debts, devalued the gold, and stayed on the silver standard until 1965, and then in 1965 totally repudiated the entirety of the substance of the common law. You know, we didn't have these kind of regulations in 1900, and it was only made possible when we left the civil law and went into admiralty. And these illegal, unlawful jurisdictions that have been imposed upon us by these alien and foreign jurisdictions, these alien bankers, banksters as I call them, is something that can be returned to the normalcy, and I'm going to use the Constitution and call that normalcy of the Constitution. And there may be millions of people that sit there and scream and yell and rant and rave and want their food stamps and one thing and another. I don't care. They can have their food stamps. The people can go around over here with transfer payments as long as they want. Those that want to volunteer into the equity can just have at it, and they can take and share, and they can practice communism and do whatever they want. So long as those of us that are free men and free persons over here on this side of the ledger are left alone. That's all I really care about. And you know, Joe Sixpack out there is always going to be Joe Sixpack, and as long as he's got his six-pack and his TV and he's happy as a clam and he's got a job, I don't think you're ever going to stir him to any action. He doesn't need it, doesn't want it, isn't concerned about it, doesn't care. But there are literally millions of people out there that care about their freedom. There's literally millions of people. We know there's 22 million people, according to the Conference Board, that don't file 1040 forms every year.
Stop stuffing sopping wet bags of ice into your cooler. I've got a brand new fridge on wheels that keeps your food ice cold without ever needing ice. It may
board that don't file 1040 forms every year. Now, I don't know what all of their motives are, but I'll tell you this much. One of their motives is sheer greed. They don't want to pay the income tax, do they? And of those 22 million people, I'll doubt if more than 2 million of them really owe the tax. The other 20 million are just ignorant. They just think they owe the tax. I don't think they want to participate in transfer payments. And for those people that do want to, let them do it. Who cares? For those of you that want to be slaves, you want credit cards, you want bank accounts, you want equity, you want a driver's license, there isn't any reason why you people can't have that, and there is great provision and great latitude in our Constitution to provide for that. There isn't any reason why any group can't go out here and form a commune and become communist and socialist and do whatever they want. They've done that in Antelope, Oregon. There's a group over there forming their own little town, and they've got their own little world, and they've got their own little constitution and rules and regulations and laws, and those people can live in whatever repression, filth, depravity that they want to. I don't care. And I'm not saying they're bad, wicked, terrible, and awful. I'm just saying if they want to do that, they can just chuck our Constitution. They don't need that, and then go over there and live in any kind of dictatorial repression they want. And there's plenty of room for that. But of those 40 citizens over there, if those 40 citizens in Antelope, Oregon knew and understood their rights, they could demand and claim their rights and live side by side by those 5,000 religious nuts, as they call them, without any problems at all. Those 40 citizens over there on the courtroom floor outnumber those 5,000 chanting Joe Sixpacks. That's right. And if any of you people over there in Oregon see this tape, let me tell you, you 40 people over there in Antelope, Oregon, have those guys outnumbered by about 20 to 1 if you only knew and understood it. Gideon went out with 300 guys and killed 120,000, and I'm not sitting here talking about violence and running out here and killing all these people. I'm just sitting here saying the Constitution and the laws of the United States are such that you 40 citizens in Antelope, Oregon outnumber all the rest of those people over there 20 to 1. You just need to know how to go out there and defeat those Anakims. Well, in conclusion then, now that we've covered, I think, just about all of the basics, you've covered the trial and the appeal and covered the scene of the crime and your status, I think that now you have the equivalent of an 8th grade education. You know, you're just about ready now to go out into the world, and as we call Lesson 31, here it comes, friend, here's the real world. Now that you've completed 30 lessons, it's ready now for bear bait. It's ready. You're ready. It's time now. If you don't have a ticket, go out and get one. You need to get into a traffic court for some reason. If you don't want to give your driver's license up, then go in and argue the merits of the case. Go in and pick a jury. Get out and do something, and in about 5 cases, when a citizen has done about 5 traffic cases or 5 misdemeanors, he's now a pretty competent fellow. Then you'll be ready to start filing lawsuits. And so with this much background and this much basics, you should be able to research case law. You should be able to go talk to Laura the librarian. You should be able to write a motion and a brief and file an affidavit and write an affidavit. I think you now, if I'm going to characterize this, are about finished with the grammar school. Now, the high school of this kind of procedure, in my opinion, is when you go into the courts and you actually do 4 or 5 cases. Then I would say that's about where you've graduated from high school. Now you're ready for real life, and now you're ready to take on your government, and you're competent and qualified. And in addition to that, you can help others. And you know, it's one person helping the next guy who helps the next guy, and pretty soon you'll be amazed. You've got a real potent force that you can use when you stake out your 9 square feet. I always stand up and I say, that 3 feet by 3 feet's mine, and this is where I'm going to defend George Gordon and his life, liberty, and property under the Constitution of the United States from here to the Supreme Court of the United States. And the rest of you better get the hell out of my road, because you're going to spend a lot of money messing with me. So friends, good luck and good hunting, and I wish you a great deal of interest. I'm sure you'll have a lot of fun at it. I've had nothing but a good time, and I've had nothing but fun for 5 years. You know, a few downs along with the ups. But those of us that have been doing this for a period of time recognize it as fun, and if you're not having fun in the courtroom, you're just not doing it right. Let's take a look at Rule 5. The court will not pass upon the validity of a statute upon complaint of one who fails to show that he's been injured by its operation. That rule doesn't apply in this case if we're talking about this Trover action, because it's a civil matter and there's no statute involved. Number 6, the court will not pass upon the constitutionality of a statute at the instance of one who has availed himself of its benefits. Now this is where I'm unique. We've already stipulated that I don't have a driver's license, registration, or proof of insurance, and that I own the property in absolute allodial freehold. There is no GMAC mortgage payments on that car. That car is mine. and I claim that property to the exclusion of everyone else in the universe, including God himself. And that's what the very definition of the word property means. And number 7, when the validity of an act of Congress is drawn into question, and even if serious doubt of constitutionality is raised, it is a cardinal principle that this court will first ascertain whether a construction of the statute is fairly possible by which the question may be avoided. Now, they're going to claim that the statutes gave them authority to take that car. And I'm sitting here saying, wait a minute, troops. Statutes and rules and regulations under Miranda do not apply. That where rights are involved, there can be no rulemaking or legislation that would abrogate those rights. And that's the horse that I'm on, and that's the horse that I'm going to ride to Washington on that particular issue. So whether it's civil or criminal, you've got to separate out the narrow issue and qualify that thing right from the scene of the crime to step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. No matter what happens, you've got your rights issues that are qualified, and each and every one of these issues that you've brought up are issues that could gain you reversal when you go into the appeals process. All right, now let's drop that subject matter here for a moment. We now know what the appeals process is. It's an expensive, long, drawn-out, time-consuming effort on your part to reverse the decision of the trial court. And in the case of a civil matter, if you're judgment-proof, you can only win and you can't lose. That's why, while it's not against the law to be a pauper or poor, it's certainly advantageous if you're going to go into the courtroom. All right, I told you where it started, and that's with Moses. And how to post bond and plead not guilty. All right, we talked about that right off the bat. What you want to do, just to recapitulate now, at the sentencing, you want to make sure now that you either have enough money to post bond to stay out of jail if it's necessary, that you have your stay of execution pending appeal, and that you have your notice of appeal ready to go. And with this lesson, we're going to send you a sample notice of appeal, and we're going to send you the brief in support of that notice of appeal as a sample. That's so that you'll have a guideline to go by. After you've done one, you can do them all. And remember, the appeals process is no huge mystery, you know, that requires 4 years in college to understand. Rule 54 is simple and straightforward. You simply look at it and it's going to say to you, and I'm going to cover that here in the second half of this lesson, it simply says step 1, step 2, step 3, and you're going to do it step 1, step 2, step 3. And if you can write a letter, you can write an appeal. Now, I want to talk to you about this thing of stipulating to the facts here for a moment, because stipulating to the facts reduces the entire process to the issues of law and separates out the issues of fact. Now, it may be that there are issues of fact that you'll want to keep into your case. If you want issues of fact, you need that trial transcript. Issues of fact, as an example, are contracts and deeds and all kinds of paper and evidence and things like this that would show that based upon the statute that your position is correct. You're a corporation, you're in some corporate capacity. As an example, maybe there's a foreclosure on your house. And during this foreclosure, there's a certain amount of facts that need to be adjudicated in front of the jury, and those facts will have to be appealed upon. That's a factual issue. Those are facts that must be brought out in the transcript and moved up through the appeals process. But when you're talking about the driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance, which we call the big three here, there are only issues of law involved here. I either have a right to drive as a matter of law or I do not. And I either have a right to that property or I do not have that right to that property. And so there are no factual issues. I don't have to sit here and say, well, did he have a license or didn't he? Was he validly licensed at the time the car was taken or wasn't it? Who cares? You see, the remedy for the government never was the conversion or the taking or the forfeiture of my property. You understand that issue? So since forfeiture was never a remedy available to the government, I don't care about the facts, whether or not I had a driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance. Now, however, if a person were a taxi driver and he were required to have the license, registration, and proof of insurance, and the officer took his car, then it would be necessary as a factual matter to show from the record, yes, I did have a license, and here's the proof of it. Here's the dates, times, and places. Here's the signature of the Department of Law Enforcement. If he had insurance, yes, here's my insurance agent, and here's his testimony, and yes, the insurance was in full force and effect. You see, if you need those facts, then you would need that factual record to go into the appeals process with. It happens that in this particular case that I've given you the two examples of today, the driver's license, registration, proof of insurance is a criminal matter on the one hand, and I'm going to cover in a moment, and the Trover action, which is a property rights issue, can I have my property back? Those items are merely issues of law. And as issues of law, I'm going to sit here and open up the law book. I'm going to sit here and pull out my Constitution, my state Constitution, and say, this is where it's at, troops. And there are no issues of fact that any of these courts need to take into consideration. So in the two cases that I've shown you now up to this moment in time, when we go forward, we're going to talk about issues of law. We're going to ride that horse of property and this driver's license registration, or this rights to drive on the roads as a matter of right, and we're going to ride that issue to the Supreme Court of the United States. I guess on the next issue we want to take up, let's talk about a demurrer, because that's exactly what a demurrer is. So let's pull one of those out. Take a look at that. A demurrer is simply a written stipulation of the facts. You're sitting here saying, in effect, and we're going to send you a sample here of a demurrer, which is an old common law term. I'm not sure in some states and some jurisdictions they're able to look at a demurrer like they do a trover and call it a tort. And you'll be faced with this from time to time. You'll take a common law action and you'll file a common law action, and as the judge did in this case, he called it a tort under the Tort Claims Act, which was an error. And I would claim a procedural error if it goes that far. I've already done that, of course, but in a demurrer, what I'm really saying, in effect, is, yeah, I don't have a driver's license, registration, proof of insurance, so what? And the demurrer, then, is what sets the factual issues off to the side. There are no issues of fact in controversy. The policeman says I was driving without a license, and I'm sitting here saying, yeah, that's right. The policeman says I'm black. Yeah, that's true. The policeman says I'm black and was riding the front of the bus, and that's true also. So what? And that's your demurrer, and you're going to walk into court and say, okay, this is the demurrer. I'm going to demur to the action. I'm admitting all of the facts, but I'm contending that I'm not guilty for this reason. You can't make a black person ride the back of the bus. So there's your demurrer. Now, an appeal on the errors of the trial court, I think I've covered that one fairly well, and said that's a factual matter over here. You'll need the record if you're going to appeal on the errors of the trial court. Now, most of the time in the past, we've always demanded, especially in the lower courts, we've said, well, we demand a transcript because we know they don't want to pay the money for the transcript. And when they refuse to pay the money for the transcript themselves, that forces them to sandbag or to drop the issue in the district court. Because after all, I don't need the transcript. It's the appeals court that needs the transcript. I've always maintained the position, well, I'm appealing on these issues. If you want to listen to the tape recording, you go ahead and listen to the tape. We all know, as a matter of practical fact, that you cannot listen to a tape, and then go through and go back, and like you can when it's written down, you can go back 10 pages and underline what somebody said, and then we'll say the same thing over here and underline the discrepancies. It's difficult to do when you're listening to it. However, they made the transcript on tape. I didn't. And so if you want that transcript written down, then it's up to you to go get that transcript. And this is especially true if it's a criminal matter. If it's a civil matter, it's a tougher row for you to hoe, because they're going to demand that you pay for this because it's a money issue. It's civil, not criminal. As a matter of criminal rules, you have a right to these things. And so you can't put me in jail and then charge me $4,000 for a transcript. And the jury instructions are really a dynamite issue for appealable issues of error in the trial court. Now, remember, when we talked about juries, we talked about jury instructions, and I think it's worth mentioning at this juncture of time that, let's say you file 20 jury instructions, and you're instructing the jury as to matters of law as it pertains to the facts of this case. And remember, we covered that and how that goes together, and how you do that, and the trial judge, for whatever reason, fails to put a key jury instruction in. I can show you dozens of cases that have been reversed on appeal or remanded back for retrial on the issue of jury instructions. And I would say that jury instructions are probably the most formidable, the best, the number one reversible error issue that you can come up with. The courts will, go, well, gosh, is this really a violation of a constitutional right? And they'll sit there. The lower courts do not like to make reversals on constitutional issues, but they will make reversals upon jury instruction issues. They'll do that a whole lot faster and a whole lot easier than they're going to make it on some major federal question like Article 1, Section 10, counsel, juries, issues like informations and grand juries. These major federal questions, the lower courts like to slough off and let the higher courts make those decisions. It's just like any other corporation, if you stop and think about it. The lower echelon management, gosh, I don't know, if I make that decision down here, it could hurt my career later. I'll slough that off and let the next level make those decisions. Now, another thing that occurs, and I think it's time to bring this up, is frustration and laziness. The more this drags on and the longer it gets and the more paper that you have to write, the more tendency there is to give up and quit. And that's why I say I just need 300 good men that can stay the course. Because, as I've said, I don't know how long it's going to take to win, but I know that somewhere between 1 and 100, you're going to surrender. The eloquence of my argument will make itself manifest in your bank statement, and I think that your common sense will tell you that it's time for you to give up and quit. Now, when we get warriors like that out there on the courtroom floor, we're indefeatable. But on the other hand, if you get into the appeals process and they're compelling you to write briefs, and this is oftentimes the case, and I saw it yesterday, and this was really hilarious. It was the day before yesterday, I went into an arraignment, and I filed about 25 motions, and briefs in support of those motions on another felony matter that concerns me. They charged me with stealing traffic tickets in the traffic court, and boy, they're really hot to put me in prison over that one for, 28 years for taking 2 traffic tickets, they are alleging. And I noticed that the judge, in this case, I think he sensed the frivolousness of the state's position. He's sitting here saying, my God, but his position is, well, if the state's going to prosecute, I've got to do my job. I'm the referee. So he ordered the state to respond in writing to every one of my motions and briefs. Do you know how much writing that is for a man to accomplish? Mine comes out of a computer. Let me show you something. Take a look at this case file. That thing's 2 inches thick. There must be, I don't know, 2, 3, maybe even 400 pages. Every word in this file that's written by me, not the responses by my opponents, but every word written by me, is on computer disk and can be reproduced probably in 3 or 4 hours. But if I write a 26-page brief and I bring up some 40 points, my opponents have to do the same thing. See, they have to respond. They have to answer each and every one of those points or lose them by default. Because if they don't answer, in other words, if I bring up the subject and say, your shirt's blue, and you don't deny that it's blue, then it's agreed that it's blue. And by the rules, all blue shirts go to the defendant, so take your shirt off and give it to me. So I win by default on that issue. All right, now it's for that reason, then, that I think that this judge did that to the opposition. He's saying to them, in effect, okay, if you guys are serious enough to want to prosecute this case, let's see you answer all of this guy's arguments. Let's see you overcome his arguments with Supreme Court case law. Where's your points and authorities? And that's important for you to do. But on the other hand, it may work just the opposite way. What if the judge requires you to do that? Are you going to give up and quit? Because as long as this case is in appeal, you cannot lose. It may just die, which is a lot of times what will happen. I had a case not long ago that the judge said, I'm going to get back, I'll give you a written opinion. That's been about 90 days since that written opinion was due. Well, I think I've waited about long enough. I know that that judge is hoping against hope that I'll just forget it. I know that my opponents want to forget it. I mean, they just want to wish and hope that I'll just dry up and blow away. And that's either a sleeping dog or a dead dog. I'm going to kick that dog. If he's asleep, I'm going to wake him up, and if he's dead, I'm going to stir up all the maggots in the carcass. And that's the way that's going to come down. That judge is not going to get off the hook. You see, I'm going to prosecute that issue to the Supreme Court of the United States, or my opponents can surrender. Anytime they want to surrender, I'll accept their defeat. And in the meantime, I'm going to take it to Washington, and the principle is total victory or total defeat. And if you're not prepared to go forward to total victory, it would be better if you didn't even raise the subject. It's better for all of us to let that sleeping dog lie unless you're prepared to go to war all the way. And I am, and so by the time they get through with that case, I'll tell you this, next year when I file a case, they're going to say, we know that George Gordon will always take his case to the Supreme Court of the United States. We know that every time we go to battle with him, it takes 3 years and $60,000. We know that he will never surrender under any circumstances. You see the kind of psychological damage I do? Look back in Scripture and you'll notice, and this is where I picked this up, and I want to pass it on to you because I think it's extremely valuable. When those Israelites went over into the what's called the Promised Land, the first place they hit was Jericho. And they marched around the city for 7 days, and here's the way it came down. The city walls fell down, and they killed every man, woman, and child, every dog, cat, and horse. They destroyed everything in that city. Then, can you imagine the kind of stark terror that must have gone around to the rest of the cities? For instance, let's say I live here in Boise, Idaho. What do you suppose would happen if we're sitting over here and word comes in that the city of Nampa has been surrounded by an alien force, leveled to the ground, burned to ashes, every citizen killed, every dog, cat, and horse absolutely destroyed? What would be the first question on my mind? Which way are they headed?
What if?
East. Uh-oh. Meridian's next, then Boise. Gee, I might say, well, probably they won't destroy a city like Boise. So the first time comes down. Now, the next city they came to, I forgot the name of it, we'll call it Ai. I think there was a town called Ai. They got to that town. They did the same thing. They killed every woman, every man, every kid. They killed every dog, every sheep, every cow, every pig. And they burned everything else. If the word came to Boise, what happened in Meridian? The same thing that happened over in Nampa. Which way are they headed? East. I'm sitting here going, gosh, twice in a row now. Look what they've done. Do you think that would create some stark terror? That's why it's so important that it always be total victory or total defeat, because when you've totally vanquished somebody and then opened up the wound and poured salt in and then sewed it back up and said, how'd that feel, dummy? When that happens once, then twice, maybe 3 times, maybe 4 times, that says to me, uh-oh. The reputation that this fellow has is that total victory or total defeat. And I always like to tell my enemies that from time to time. Total victory or total defeat. Then they face guys like Hallstrom and Cook and Potts and Kruger, and on it goes. And so the word spreads around in the legal circles of Ada County, and they say these people will accept nothing short of total victory or total defeat. Don't sit here and threaten to throw them in jail, because they'll put their hands behind their backs and say, follow me. They know exactly what to do, and they know exactly how to handle it. Now, we've covered that. Now, you get to the appeals process, and it takes you a year between, the scene of the crime and the appeals process. And it takes maybe, into the second year before in your county 4 or 5 people get their appeals in, and they begin to recognize that these people will never surrender. Never surrender. Because yesterday I noticed when we walked out of the courthouse, serious conversation going on. And I know exactly what they're talking about, because if I was in their place, I know exactly what I would be talking about. I am faced with 3 more levels of appeals. I am faced with an opponent who hasn't got intelligence enough to give up and quit when he doesn't have a chance. And in the meantime, while I know that I'm more competent, I know that I can defeat him, he keeps bloodying my nose and blacking my eyes. And the question is, how much money do we want to spend on this guy? Don't you think it would have been more logical to just pay this guy the $1,600 for his Chevrolet automobile and the $1,500 for his motorcycle? You know, at any time they could have walked over and paid me $3,000, and I would have smiled like a clam at high tide and taken the offer, and they would have been through with me a year ago. And at this moment in time, they're in $7,000, and there is no end in sight. Got that? No end in sight. Now, let's go on now to some technical aspects. I want you to turn to Rule 54. You should have the Idaho Rules of Idaho Rules of Criminal Procedure. Go ahead and turn to that. Some of you are going to have the binder edition, and some of you will have the little small book. Let's take a look at a simple rule. Now, by now, you people should be competent to read rules. You know, you've gone through a number of rules, Rule 16, Rule 5, you've filed motions, you've been writing motions, you understand motion hearings and how to notice them up in one thing and another. Let's just take a quick, brief perusal here at Rule 54. We're getting toward the end of the rules. I want to point out some crucial factors now to you, because these rules must be followed to the gnat's whisker. Any error on your part on this rule is going to weed you out. And I want to caution you on this. If the rule says 42 days, friend, don't file it on the 43rd day. Because if you don't follow the rules right here, the Supreme Court has a history of weeding you out. You're just the other 50%, man. You didn't do what you were told down here at the lower level. We're not going to listen to your appeal. You can have this gigantic federal question. You can have this just real nifty issue that the Supreme Court is just drooling to listen to. And remember, if there is any other way that we can dispense of this, we will. And let me tell you, they're going to make you dot every I and cross every T. Fortunately, they're only holding you to the standards of a lawyer. Thank God they're not holding you to the standards of competence. Taking a look at Rule 54 on page 475, says here, appeals from a magistrate to a district court. Here's your first level of appeal. Appealable judgments and orders. Bear in mind now that if you're in Illinois, you'd better be on your Illinois rules, right? But I want to use the Idaho rules of procedure because generally throughout the land they'll be essentially the same. But let me tell you, there's going to be some I's and T's that'll have different punctuations, and that's what you've got to watch for. It says appealable judgments and orders. Okay, you have to appeal judgments and orders. If the judge, you may not have been to trial, you may have an order or a judgment, a judicial determination. It may be incumbent, like with Rick. We made a strategic error there, and I brought that up in Lesson 29. It says, oops, we got an order from a judge, and we didn't appeal his order. On the order. Slipsies on our part. And oops, we got an order from a judge, and we didn't appeal his order. Slipsies on our part. And so, while that judge said, well, I'm going to rule that you're a taxpayer, he should have appealed that judicial determination and said, no, I'm not a taxpayer, and he should have appealed it immediately, and he didn't do that. Okay, so judgments and orders then. And there shall be no direct appeal from an order or decision of a magistrate to the Supreme Court. Okay, So don't go from the lower court straight to the Supreme Court. You must go in line, like I said, A, B, C, D. Provided, however, that whenever the Supreme Court, upon petition of the administrative district judge of a judicial district, assigns an attorney magistrate to hear any felony action, any appeal taken from a judgment of such magistrate action under such order shall be made to the Supreme Court. So here's an exception. Okay, so you can read the exception as well as I can. An appeal may be taken to the district judge's division of the district court from any of the following judgments, orders, or decisions. Now watch. You appeal judgments, you appeal orders, you appeal decisions. Those are the magic three. Judgments, orders, and decisions. A judgment is, you've been found guilty and my judgment is 30 days in jail and a $300 fine. You appeal that. You have an order. I'm going to order you to specifically perform. No, I don't want to fill that 1040 form out. You appeal that order. Or decisions. You have a judicial decision, let's say. You appeal. You say, the trial court says, no, you can't have counsel, and you appeal that decision. You know, theoretically, a guy could take a decision like that, and he could move a decision up through the ranks to Washington, and Washington could come back and say, yeah, you've got to give him counsel before you go to trial. This appeals process works before the jury verdict, even. I've made appeals to the district and the Supreme Court on issues before I've gone to trial, and the purpose for that is to get a judicial determination to force the trial court to do a specific thing or to grant me a specific right. Now, there are 6 items here, so let's just, see, there's 7, 8. I want to read up here to line 9, because when you get up to line 9, that's called the notice of appeal. And a notice of appeal, I'm going to send that along in this lesson. It's simply 2 pages, and it simply runs out here through the first 8 paragraphs. So between item 1 on page 475 and item 9 on page 476, I'm simply going to follow the directions that are given here. And it's just as simple as making a Betty Crocker cake. It just says, step 1, get a bowl. Okay. Step 1, bowl. What next? Get 3 eggs. Okay. 3 eggs. Now what? Break eggs in bowl. Okay. Plunk. That's exactly what you do. You follow these rules line by line, item by item. I don't know how many people that I've seen do this. They'll fail to read the rules, or for some reason, they just get it in their heads. Well, I'm in a hurry. I've got to be at the beauty parlor, and I'll put that off until tomorrow, or I'll do this later, or I'll just skip that. Gee, I wonder if I have to do that. All right, item 1, final judgment of conviction is what you're appealing from. And so number 1, I say this appeal is made within 42 days of judgment or order. Okay? Item 2, by a defendant only, from an order granting or denying a withheld judgment on a verdict or plea of guilty. Okay, number 2, this case was heard in the Magistrates Court of the 4th Judicial District, Traffic Division, County of Ada, State of Idaho, and the presiding judge was Hamilton. Okay? I'm the defendant. An order granting a motion to dismiss a complaint. An order granting a motion. I'll just read through these here. I don't need to follow through each one of these items. An order granting a motion to suppress evidence in a misdemeanor criminal action. An order denying a motion for a new trial. An order made after judgment affecting the substantial rights of a defendant or the state. Number 6, I've appealed on that one on the counsel issue. I've had judges in the magistrate court say, no, you can't have counsel of your choice unless he's a licensed lawyer, and I've appealed that. Sometimes that gets sandbagged. When the judicial process does not want to listen to issues and they just want to get rid of you and get you out of their hair, they'll let you have a victory by simply sandbagging your issue. Number 7, any order, judgment, or decree in a special criminal proceeding in which an appeal is provided by statute, and any order holding a person in contempt of court other than those contempts defined in Rule 42A. Time for filing appeals. All appeals permitted or authorized by these rules may be made only by the physical filing of a notice of appeal with the clerk of the district court of the county wherein the magistrate trial was held within 42 days from the date evidenced by the filing stamp of the clerk of the court on the judgment, order, or decree appealed from. So here's what you do. There's got to be a written judgment, order, or decree. There'll be a file stamp on it. On the 42nd day, in other words, let's say it's dated July 12th, then the first day is July 13th, and the second day is July 14th. On the 42nd day, you'd better have a file stamp on your notice of appeal in the state of Idaho. Now, in some jurisdictions, it may be 30 days. It may be 30 working days. It may be 30 days including holidays or excluding holidays and weekends. I mean, they've got all kinds of nifty little rules in different jurisdictions, so watch that timing. That timing, I've seen a number of people foul up on their appeals by not getting that appeal in correctly on the right days. And any such list of issues on appeal shall not prevent the appellant from asserting other issues on appeal thereafter discovered by the appellant. Now, let me give you an illustration of that. I filed an appeal. I filed a demurrer and said the only issues are issues of law. The district court said to me, yes, we will listen to that. We're going to listen to that appeal because they don't need a trial transcript. All they're going to listen to are the affidavits, motions, and the legal arguments. I filed my notice of appeal. I filed a brief in support of the appeal. And now, up to 5 days prior to the appeal being heard, and in this case I think it's August the 6th, they're going to listen to my appeal, or August 5th, I've forgotten exactly the date, I can file additional information. In other words, I've got my appealable issues, the brief in support of appeal, but, you know, there may be some new matter that comes up, new case law, new information that I'm researching and putting in. And I have to give my opponent an opportunity to respond to that. Now, it may be 10 days in your jurisdiction, or it may be 15 days. I don't know what it is. Check it out, and it should be right here in Rule 54. But I think in pursuant to our rules, I think I have up to 5 days with which to put it in. Now we'll go in and we'll argue our positions, our appendixes, our case law, and everything before the appeals judge. And the judge will look at it. In this case, it's a woman. And she'll look at it and she'll say yay or nay to me. But I have a judicial determination, don't I? Then I have 42 days with which to appeal that decision to my state Supreme Court. Now, the state Supreme Court has the rules of the Supreme Court of the state of Idaho. And its rules are a little different than these rules. So now you've got to pull that rule book out and say, okay, item 1, item 2, item 3. Now when you file an appeal to the state Supreme Court, they have more stringent rules pursuant to the cover. As an example, you have to have a hardbound cover, and it's got to have an appendix to it, and it's got to have nomenclature, and it'll spell it right out in the rules. Sometimes I've noticed that some of our citizen pro se's, when they see all of this writing and all of these rules that they have to adhere to, they get discouraged at that. And they say to themselves, oh gosh, you know, and then they let the appeal time go by. And then all of a sudden comes, oh, the realization, and the realization comes when it's remanded back for execution of the sentence. Remember, if you fail in your appeal and it's remanded back for execution of the sentence because of a technical violation over here, the higher courts now will keep remanding it back because of a technical violation, and now you're at the mercy of the trial court judge who probably doesn't like you too well anyway. And that's the thing in my mind that always keeps the prod on me. I always look over my shoulder and I say to myself, uh-oh, I don't want to ever have to face that guy again. And that prods me on to appealing to the next court and the next court. And the higher up it goes, and the more responses that need to be taken. For instance, I live here in Idaho, and let's say we're going to argue this case before the Ninth Circuit in San Francisco. Well, I'm an indigent, so I'm going to file a notice of demand and a need for air transportation, motels, and accommodations in San Francisco, am I not? And I'm going to need counsel while I go down there, and so I'm going to have counsel and accommodations for my counsel. Now, the state of Idaho doesn't want me to go to San Francisco, and I know that. And I know they want to weed me out in the worst way. So I'm sitting over here saying, okay, I'm going to keep it going until they give up. Not me. So far, in 5 years, my opponents have always given up, and I've never had to go beyond our state Supreme Court. I've lodged a couple of appeals over there, but I've never had them heard. Okay, so the rules that you go upon here, you know, are simply the rules that lay out, and I'm not going to sit here and waste everybody's time. Over here on Rule 481, on page 481, let's take a look at this. I've underlined it where it says the failure to physically file a notice of appeal or notice of cross appeal with the district court, each within the time limits prescribed by these rules, shall be jurisdictional and shall cause automatic dismissal of such appeal upon the motion of any party to file a notice of appeal or notice of cross appeal with the district court. Each within the time limits prescribed by these rules shall be jurisdictional and shall cause automatic dismissal of such appeal upon the motion of any party or upon the initiative of the district court. And let me tell you, the initiative of the district court, you won't have to tell them twice to dismiss. Now, that's why it's so crucial to get the time limit down. And there are other rules in here, too, as to the form and the effect of it. Take a look at this brief in support of the appeal. Pull that out. And you've got a notice of appeal with this lesson, and you've got a brief in support of the appeal. And it's called a statement of the facts. And it's about 7 pages long. And you'll notice that it's notarized at the end. I think this notice of appeal is also notarized. No, it isn't. I believe your notice of appeal probably ought to be notarized, and the brief in support of the appeal ought to be notarized. I think that's one of the rules that you'll find here in Rule 54. Let's just take a look at some of the more salient facts or issues that are brought up in a brief in support of the appeal. An example of it is, let's say you're going to appeal on counsel. You were denied counsel. You write a paragraph in here on counsel. It is not necessary for you to write 26 pages on counsel in your appeal brief because that's superfluous. All you need to do is to go down your list over here and just write a brief paragraph subject to motion to appoint a public prosecutor. That's your prosecutor issue. You've got a prosecutor brief. You've got a prosecutor motion in here. I would write about 1 paragraph, maybe it's got 15, 20 sentences in it that simply lay out the essentials and says, please see my brief in support of the motion to appoint a public prosecutor. Anyway, just kind of reading on through here, it's a pretty standard brief and motion. It simply says, comes now the defendant to move the district court to reverse the conviction of the defendant in this instant case for the following causes. Okay? So we've got a motion here. And we've got a brief. That's all it really amounts to. It's called an appeal brief. It's called an appeal, notice of appeal. The defendant was found guilty of driving a car without registration or proof of insurance. The third charge of failure to display a driver's license was dropped when the prosecution could not prove the defendant was in fact a licensed driver. They didn't want to address the driver's license issue. The defendant stipulated to the facts as follows. I have no driver's license, registration, or proof of insurance. The defendant so stipulated both at arraignment and in the trial court. The prosecution, now that's your demurrer. So your demurrer said, yeah, so what? The prosecution insisted upon moving forward in a jury trial over the objection of the defendant. The defendant refused to plead, challenged the jurisdiction, and demanded all of his rights. You see, just the essential facts. The defendant suggested the case be sent to the district court to hear the issues of law and constitutional rights, all to no avail. The prosecutor in this case wanted to put another notch on his gun and get a jury conviction. To which I say, big deal. There are no issues of fact, only issues of law. This case and the issues of the driver's license, registration, and insurance is only one of 6 cases which have been taken to the district court in an action for declaratory judgment. The case is 81358 and is going to be heard by Judge Newhouse. Several motions were filed and denied. Defendant contended that he is not a person required to have a driver's license, registration, or insurance. What am I saying? I'm contending that I'm not a person who's required to ride the back of the bus. I am stipulating that I am black. I am stipulating that I rode the front of the bus. And I am stipulating that that's a violation of statute and blah, blah, blah. See what we're doing? Very simple, straightforward procedure. Now, we come to the second portion of it, the mechanics of the brief, which says the appealable issue. Okay? Well, remember, these appealable issues are going to be different in every case. The appealable issues is this entire nomenclature. If you refer back to Lesson 9, there was 38 items. Of the 38 items, let's say 20 of them are motions for some item. 20 of them are motions for some item. One of the appealable issues may be Rule 16. Another appealable issue is notice and demand for right sua sponte. A third appealable issue is notice and demand for counsel of choice, and so on down the line. There may be one, there may be 20. And remember, in the Almeida Sanchez case, he had one appealable issue, and that was the search and seizure issue. Well, if you'll notice over here in Lesson 9, I might have 20 issues, including search and seizure. Okay, we're on page 2 here, called Appealable Issues. The defendant made a notice and demand for dismissal pursuant to statute. An order for the dismissal of the action as provided in this chapter is a bar to any other prosecution for the same offense. That is, if it's a misdemeanor, but it is not a bar if the offense is a felony. Okay, we have a statute in this state which should have dismissed these charges against me because they've been brought over and over and over again and they're the same charges. And while it's not double jeopardy, we have a statute that says, look, if it's been dismissed once, it can be dismissed again and again. And this particular magistrate said, no, I'm going to go ahead and try the case. So when I go to the appeals court, I'm going to say, hey, it ought to be dismissed on this statute alone. And I've had it dismissed before on this statute alone. And I'll bring that up in the oral argument to the judge and say, look, Judge Smedley over here dismissed based upon this statute. This other magistrate didn't. And so I'm coming to you and saying, I think Judge Smedley ruled correctly when he dismissed this. It's been tried over and over again. And it's been dismissed over and over again. And so we go on, and there's one of the appealable issues. Number 3, then, we've got the counsel issue. And I wrote in here a few key counsel quotations from the Supreme Court of the United States. And I raised the counsel issue, and you can read that for yourself. And then item 4, the prosecuting attorney issue. And I raised the prosecuting attorney issue, and I said it should be reversed on that indicia. And item 5, the driver's license issue. Please refer to my brief on driver's license is evidence of consent. In other words, see, I don't need to sit here and write a 12 or 14-page brief. Just refer to it. Now the judge will open up and say, oh, okay, driver's license brief. Oh, okay, now that judge can read that driver's license brief. Item 6, demur and demand for dismissal. I filed a demur. The major federal question. Now, this is the one where I file the appendix. So what I'm going to do next, I've got everything in except the appendix. So I'm going to go up and file an appendix to the brief in support of the notice of appeal. And I'm going to put that whole driver's license issue with about 500 cases in before this judge, and I'm going to go argue it. And when we go to argue it, I'm going to bring up the Supreme Court of several states and the federal Supreme Court and my right to travel in the whole 9 yards. And then the judge will be faced with, do I want to rule against Gordon? Because if I rule against him, I know he's going to take me across the street and up the line forever. Or do I want to rule for Mr. Gordon? And if I rule for Mr. Gordon, I could be opening Pandora's box, and every driver in Ada County will throw his driver's license away. So what you're doing, in effect, is putting the judge in the same position as Pontius Pilate. You know, I don't want to kill the guy because he's not guilty, but on the other hand, if I don't give him to the people, it won't look good to Caesar, and I won't get a promotion next year. I may not get a merit raise. No, Pilate was a good bureaucrat. And so some of our judges are good bureaucrats. But some of our judges also know and understand constitutional law. And if enough of us, and I'm not saying thousands of us, I said enough, 10, 15 people. You know, it only requires about 10 or 15 people, to my estimation, maybe 30 at the most. Good, competent pro se's operating in any county, going into those courts regularly. I mean, once a year out of the 15 or 30 that you've got. And there's 15 to 30 lawsuits a year, 15 to 30 constitutional questions a year. Pretty soon, the lower courts will have to start making those decisions pursuant to the Marbury Doctrine, because if they don't, it floods the higher courts, and pretty soon the state Supreme Court says, "What's the matter with you dummies over there? Can't you make decisions?" Now, that hasn't been done in America for 75 years. Citizens have not been taking their issues to court, and it's time that they started doing that again. And that's why here in Ada County, I just got word in the newspaper the other day that they're going to have to hire some new judges here to hear all these appeals that are coming around. Gosh, I wonder where all these appeals are coming from. I'll tell you where all the appeals are coming from. They're coming from citizens, people just like me and people just like you. And you know, every appeal that goes in there, they're sitting there, "Oh, we'll just dispense of this housewife from Cuna. Why, she's dumb. She can't chew gum." And pretty soon you get this housewife from Cuna walking in there with good paper. We've got a housewife that can chew gum and talk at the same time, Judge. And I want my issues listened to. And all of a sudden, oops, gosh, now I've got to listen to this woman. And whether he's an unjust judge or not, he's sitting there saying, I've got to listen to this case. And the reason that the lower courts will be compelled to listen and make these decisions at the lower level on constitutional grounds is because the higher courts, remember, have less and less available resources to do it. Now watch this scenario.